Welcome to the G20 Interfaith podcast, a platform where we explore the intersection of faith, global challenges, and policy.
Welcome to another episode of the G20 Interfaith Forum podcast. My name is Stuart Bird.
And I'm Mariana Richardson.
We're your hosts today, and today we're joined by Dr. Iyad Abumoghli. Dr. Iyad Abumoghli, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We are delighted to have him with us. Just to introduce you to our listeners, I wanted to read your quick bio. Dr. Iyad Abumoghli is the founder and director of UNEP's Faith for Earth Coalition and founder and chair of Al-Misan. He has also been a member of the G20 Interfaith Forum Association's Advisory Council since 2021. He currently lives in Amman, Jordan, and spends his time traveling the world to unite faith leaders, communities, and policymakers around a shared commitment to sustainability, climate action, and environmental justice. And I know that in addition, there's a lot of other things that you're involved in, and our listeners can find more information about you on various websites, including LinkedIn, and other organizations that you've been involved in.
So we're interested in starting out just by asking what led you to focus on these efforts that you're doing, and they are significant and so important.
Well, thank you. First of all, greetings, Stuart and Mariana. I'm very happy to be with you here today. My focus on climate change and sustainable development and environmental governance emerged from my profound realization that what we are facing is not simply an environmental challenge, but an existential threat that is reshaping every dimension of human life. If we talk about climate change, it is disturbing rainfall, worsening droughts, and sandstorms, especially in the Middle East region, and depleting water resources that are scarce in the region, undermining agriculture, food security, and biodiversity. And these impacts are interconnected. If water declines, agriculture fails. And if agriculture fails, livelihoods and food systems collapse. And as ecosystems degrade, the resilience of the entire society is weakened. So climate change is not one crisis among many. It is the force that amplifies all other crises. So while this issue had already begun to gain global recognition before I joined the UN in 1997, long time ago, my professional journey actually brought me to be close to to realize the consequences on humans. And I served as a sustainable development advisor for the Arab States region and later as a regional representative of the UN in the West Asia region. And in these roles, I worked extensively with governments and stakeholders on mitigation and adaptation strategies, supporting governments in navigating the growing risk. Yet, over time, I came to understand a deeper truth. Climate change and the failing of environmental systems is not merely a failure of policy or technology. It is actually a failure of values. So at its core, these issues, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, are a reflection of a moral imbalance driven by greed, sustained by apathy, and normalized by indifference. So this realization marked a turning point. It led me to focus on the ethical and spiritual dimension of the crisis, and ultimately to establish the Faith for Earth Coalition at UNEP, and with the aim to mobilize faith actors not only to respond to climate change, but also to address its root causes.
Well, and I
Thank
think
you
that's
for
fascinating too, because most faiths do have some kind of a faith tradition that we are stewards of the earth. And as stewards of the earth, we need to take care of it. And obviously, we're not doing a very good job right now.
Yeah.
We're not. In fact, we're abusing the resources that we have, and we're not actually going by what we believe. And this is a message that I always tell the leaders that I meet. You need to practice what you preach. And if you preach that we are stewards of the earth, we have to live in harmony with our nature and natural resources, we have to practice that. And this is the message that I keep giving, and this is the driver behind the establishment of the Faith for Earth Coalition.
Thank you for mentioning that Faith for Earth Coalition that you founded and directed. While you were there directing that, what progress did you see in protecting a clean and sustainable environment?
Well, a lot, and I can tell you some of them. And that is not because I founded it and I led it, but because of the overwhelming support that I received from all the people that I have worked with, whether individuals, leaders, or institutions. We actually witnessed profound shift. Faith communities moved from the margins of environmental discourse and governance to the center of global action. One of our main and most significant achievements was the accreditation process, where we accredited more than 100 faith-based organizations to UNEP. We had none, we had zero when we started. And being accredited to UNEP means that you have a seat on the table of decision making. So when faith leaders enter the policy space, they bring with them the conscience of communities. And through the collaboration and coordination and working with such organizations, we convened high-level interfaith summits. Never happened before, to talk about environmental issues and climate change. If you remember COP26, when Pope Francis invited all the leaders and they came and they issued declarations and so on. And these declarations, the beautiful thing about them is that they are not only calls for others to act, but also commitments of the faith leaders themselves to act within their own institutions and systems. We also mobilized a global movement to green assets of faith organizations. Everybody knows by now, we have it in reports of UNEP, that faith organizations are the fourth largest economic power on earth. And they own assets beyond imagining. So we needed to work with them. As I mentioned, practice what you preach. If you have an organization and it's contributing to environmental degradation and climate change, then start by thyself to reduce these impacts. We held these summits, back to back with most of the COPs of climate change since COP26. We had one at the Vatican, one in Abu Dhabi, one in Baku, and later on in Brazil. However, it was not a large-scale faith pavilion, but it was a convening of the faith actors. But perhaps most importantly, we introduced the concept of moral responsibility for climate action, reframing the narrative from obligation to ethical duty. And sustainability is not only a scientific necessity, it is a moral obligation. So these efforts translated into tangible impact. Faith actors contributed to fossil fuel divestment, for example, in the billions of dollars, and strengthened climate literacy within religious communities. and advance the greening of houses of worship worldwide. And we published some guidelines for that, some guidelines for how to celebrate festivals, faith festivals, and so on. So we contributed to, working on the illiteracy, well, in terms of environmental action and what is needed and what we are facing. And we connected that to the teachings of almost all religions. We selected each of the religions and we ran an assessment of how that religion relates to environmental action in all of its aspects, whether it's climate change, biodiversity, pollution, and what have you. So these have become, a point of reference for faith organizations when they wanted to talk about their role in climate action. They refer to those guidelines and documentation.
Wow, it's such amazing the work that you're doing. And I do agree how important it is that, you know, churches that say that we're here stewards, we need to be the forefront. We need to be the examples. And so I know that you're the chair of Al Mizan, which is a covenant for the earth. And I love that principle, a covenant for the earth. On the Al Mazan website, it says that the triple planetary crisis is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population. And so, how are faith groups able to make a difference in all three of these areas?
Well, when I wanted to work with and support the work of Pope Francis when he launched Laudato Si, and I said, well, 25% of the global population are Christians, and were addressed by Pope Francis. Yet another 25% of the global population are Muslims, and they all refer to one book, which is the Holy Quran. And from my earlier studies, I know that the Holy Quran is rich in its environmental aspects. So we convened scholars from all corners of the world, Muslim scholars, and we dug deep into the Holy Quran and the Prophet practices and so on. So the main concept of Al-Mizan, which means the balance in English, the balance, calls for balance in justice, in harmony, and recognition of the interconnectedness of all forms of life. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and unsustainable consumption patterns are not separate crises. They are manifestation of the deeper imbalance in how we live and relate to the earth. So the triple planetary crisis is at its heart a crisis of imbalance. So faith groups are uniquely positioned to restore this balance, as we mentioned in the Al-Mizan. They shape values, they influence behaviors, and they guide communities toward responsibility and stewardship. They also play a critical role in advancing a new economic paradigm, one that serves people and communities rather than the narrow industrial interests. An economy that destroys the earth cannot sustain humanity. This is what we realized. A powerful example lies in the Islamic finance system, which promotes socially responsible and environmentally sustainable investments. It emphasizes fairness, prohibition of harmful speculations, and prioritizes real economic activity that benefits communities. So finance must return to its original purpose to serve life, not to exploit it. So through these main principles, faith actors do more than just raising awareness. They help reshape systems, redirect incentives, and restore balance between humanity and nature.
Thank you. it seems like from what I've read of what you've written, um, it's it's almost easier said than done. You wrote that the environmental crisis is not only a planetary challenge, but also a moral and spiritual test, one we can overcome when communities act with compassion, unity, and courage. Um, I'm just interested to know what you meant by that. Why are compassion, unity, and courage needed? And why is it a moral and spiritual test in addition to just a planetary challenge?
Well, Stuart, what I mean is that the environmental crisis reflects a deeper imbalance within human values and priorities. It is not only about what is happening to the planet, it is about what is happening within us. The state of the earth is a mirror of the state of our conscience. So, calling it a moral and spiritual test emphasizes that solutions require more than policies or technologies, they require transformation. It is a test of compassion, whether we care for those already suffering and for generations yet to come. It is a test of unity, whether we can transcend divisions and act as one human family. It is a test of courage, whether we are willing to change, to challenge entrenched systems, and to choose long-term well-being over short-term gain. The greatest challenge is not the limits of our resources, but the limits of our will. So passing this test means aligning our actions with our values and recognizing that responsibility is not optional, it is fundamental.
I think that is so powerful. I was talking to some of my students at the university the other day and was complaining. We're in the middle of a drought right now, and we're very worried about the water for the summer that even just drinking water. And I was making that comment to a student, and the student said, "Oh, well, it just seems like that's an old person problem." I which I thought was interesting because he said, "Yeah, my parents, complain about that all the time, but I don't understand what they're complaining about." And I thought about this statement that you just said, how important it is too that we help, the rising generation understand because they've had things so easy. It's always been there. And I love your idea of courage. And sometimes courage means to do something different than what's been done for generations. So, I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, indeed. And one of the problems that I mentioned is the issue of indifference. When it's not hitting you directly, you feel indifferent about it. Let somebody else solve it. I'm not the water engineer. I am not the one who is causing the drought or climate change or whatever. So let governments deal with it, or let technologies solve it. As long as I have a tap water and as long as the water is running, that's my problem. But indeed, it is each and every one of us that are, should be involved and should contribute to the solution.
So, what can an individual do? So, when you talk about individual responsibility, I completely agree. But what can a person who's listening in on this podcast do specifically to help this problem?
Well, there are different levels of the answer, and it depends on who we are talking to. If we're talking to policymakers, we make different arguments. If we're talking to ordinary people, we say, at least go back to your values, go back to the teachings of what you believe in. If it is a Muslim, I would say your Prophet Muhammad said, conserve water even if you were at a running river. Look, that was 1400 years ago. And, washing your hands, how much would it take out of the river? But the foresight is that, this resource is not for you alone. It's for a whole community. So this is part of the understanding that we need to make sure that everybody understands. Water, for example, if we talk about water, why was it made sacred? Because there's a value in it. When you go to a church, the first thing you touch when you enter the church is a water because, it's sacred. When you have a baby, new baby, you go to the church and you bless them with a sacred water. So water is so important. And the importance of the water is not because it was prayed at or, it is because of its value. So if we go to our values, our teachings, we know that our individual behaviors can affect an entire community. One of the documents that we issued was how to celebrate our faith festivals sustainably. For example, when you celebrate Christmas, we know the global figures, the scientific figures, that Christmas is the most wasteful celebration because it's of packaging, cutting trees, and what have you. But you can do all of this. You can celebrate and happy and enjoy it in a sustainable manner. Ramadan, for example, Ramadan is the month of fasting. We're supposed to consume less food, but in Ramadan, the waste increases by 10%. That is unbelievable. So if we go to the teachings and we understand what they mean, then each individual can actually contribute.
I love that. That is so powerful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for explaining that and for opening our eyes to that. We'd like to shift our conversation to your involvement with the G20 Interfaith Forum Association, the IF20. So, how did you first become involved with IF20?
Well, I believe it was in 2021 when the discussions for the G20 were to be held in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia.
Mhm.
And I was invited by the IF20 to discuss the issues of environment and environmental governance and how faith actors can contribute to the discussions. So I did a lot of research and I wrote some reports on the state of climate change in the Arab States region and in Africa, and how faith actors can contribute to addressing climate change. So this engagement continued after that across subsequent IF20 processes and discussions, and where I worked to ensure that the perspectives of faith, values, and moral responsibility were integrated into the broader G20 dialogue. And I always emphasize that policy without values lacks direction. Values without policy lack impact. So we need both. And this is where my contributions to IF20 and the discussions that I have with the leaders, and the last one was during our presence in COP29 in Baku, and it was a marvelous interaction, and we agreed that it is important for the religious component to be integrated into the discussions of the economic powers of the earth, so we connect both of them.
And that's what we're all about. I mean, IF20, kind of our mantra is bringing faith and policy together. And so, yes, we definitely have very similar values and concerns about what's happening with policy and making sure that those faith values are still a part of governmental policy throughout the world. One of the things that's interesting this year in G20 is that, of course, the Trump administration, USA, G20 this year, they get to pick the three basic topics that are going to be discussed at the G20 level. And one of them, of course, is on climate. I mean, it has to be, right? I mean, this is such a crucial issue internationally. But it's interesting that they're taking the spin of deregulation of climate controls. And so I would love just kind of your thoughts about, deregulation of climate controls. Do we need more regulation or less regulation?
Well, first of all, we need to agree if climate change is happening or not, especially in the US. I mean, it's a controversial issue. But whether it is happening or not, whether we're talking to our American friends and colleagues, or we're talking to the global community, who I believe 99% of them believe in climate change, there's something existential happening, and it is impacting all of us, whether we call it climate patterns, changes in weather or whatever. Something is happening, and we are contributing to it, and to the impacts that it is having on everybody. So many scientific reports. I mean, if you go to IPCC reports, the latest ones, I mean, without a doubt, the scientists, they say that the humans are the main cause for climate change. Humans meaning our practices, our consumption and production patterns, the proliferation of oil and gas, the lack of understanding of there are other natural resources that are clean, available, and affordable that can contribute to development rather than relying on the easy but more expensive nowadays. The production of 1 kilowatt from oil now is much more expensive than producing it by solar systems. It's becoming so easily available. But of course, economies get into the equation, greed gets into the equation, and the love to control comes to the equation. So these are the issues that we need to discuss. In addition, of course, to discuss how to mitigate, how to adapt, whom to compensate, who to pay for the mitigation measures and so on. But essentially, we need to discuss, how to move into a more sustainable world where, technology is available, sustainable technology that is, and how to maximize that, and how to continue developing nations and, of course, communities with renewable sources of energy that are affordable and are available. So it is indeed a subject that needs to be on the table. Deregulation comes from the denial aspect of things, because it is not the matter how many regulations there are, but how effective those regulations are. And second, who gets engaged in adopting these regulations, because these regulations might be global, international systems, but how to build the capacity of national systems to adopt and adapt these international laws and regulations in their localities so they can be effective at the national level where things happen, in fact. So regulating climate change is very important. I believe we have spent decades coming up with these regulations. So it is not, for one nation or one person or a couple of nations to say, well, these regulations don't work anymore. Because all of these regulations were scientifically based, and they came out of years and years of research and scientific findings and so on. So I think we need to think why these regulations are not working and how to make them work more effectively.
I'm so glad you said that. I do think that the United States is the number one. We, we really have a problem. We're the number one polluters in the world. And so, as the United States, we need to do exactly what you're saying, looking at our greed, looking at our values, and seeing what we can do to do better, not just for our own country, but for the world. So, thank you so much for your thoughts. As we look forward, what is your thoughts? What can IF20, what can G20 do as we look to the future, especially this year? We're trying to do a policy paper based a lot on many of the things that you said. And so, what does the future look like?
Well, the first thing to do is actually be at the G20. It is essential. It's the most powerful economic convening of the globe. So there where global politics play heavy. So we need to be there and we need to discuss the issues of not only religions but values in general, moral responsibility, and the ethics of economy, ethics of development, ethics of science, all types of ethics, because this is what is lacking. A couple of months ago, I wrote a report for the United Nations, which is on the science policy value and faith nexus. Because everybody talks about science and policy, how science supports policy and policy built on the science. But science and policy without ethics are ineffective. They might be effective, but not that effective that we want. And somebody somewhere might come back and challenge the science and challenge the policies. But with ethics and values, it is rooted. It is discussing the infrastructure for science and for policies. So we need to keep introducing the importance of ethics and values. And a good example when during COP30, when the global ethical stocktake was launched by the Minister of Climate Change of Brazil. That was an important event. And its important is actually introducing that pillar of the science policy nexus. So we need to shape the decision for the future of humanity, the future of our planet. And so faith must have one of the seats on the table of these discussions. We need to engage not only as spectators or stakeholders to be asked questions here and there, but we need to listen to them and what they have to offer, their principles, their values, and even consider their impacts, because even when there is going to be a unification of principles and values of religion, sooner or later it is happening, and people are getting more closer to one another. So governments need to harness that moment for a better future, for a more unified position between policymakers and value bearers and moral responsibilities and so on. So we need to harness that, and we need to make that happening at the next G20.
Well, and IF20 is 100% behind everything that you're talking about. And we do have hope that we will make a difference this G20. We really do.
That's right. Yeah, thank you for that. I love what you said about making sure that faith is involved in the policy and science nexus discussion, and really the IF20 is involved in making sure that faith is inserted into those conversations. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope that our listeners will go on to the Al Misan, A Covenant for the Earth website. They can also learn more about Dr. Abumoghli when they go to the United Nations Environment Program, or UNEP, Faith for Earth Coalition website, as well as on the IF20 website. We have things that Dr. Abumoghli has said at events and things that he has written as well.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
so
much,
much.
sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you very much. Pleasure always to discuss with you, and good luck in the upcoming meetings, and all the best.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
The podcast provides information and discussions on the G20 Interfaith Forum, but the views expressed are those of the individuals involved and not necessarily the official stance of the forum.
The content is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice or expert recommendations. Listeners should exercise personal responsibility, seek professional guidance, and conduct further research when making decisions based on the podcast.
The information shared may not always reflect the most current developments, and external links or resources are provided for additional information but are not endorsed or controlled by the podcast.
By listening to the podcast, listeners acknowledge and accept these disclaimers. Please be aware that the content of this podcast may be subject to copyright. Unauthorized copy, distribution, and reproduction of any part of the podcast is prohibited.